At the family barbecue, my daughter-in-law said, "You could disappear and no one would miss you." Everyone laughed, except me. I simply nodded. The next day, I packed my bags. And when the lawyer's letter arrived, my phone rang over 100 times. I've replayed that moment in my mind countless times. It was supposed to be a celebration for my 65th birthday. My son James had insisted on hosting it at their suburban home with its perfectly manicured lawn and matching patio furniture. The weather couldn't have been more beautiful. Warm sunshine, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of flowering magnolias and sizzling meat on the grill. I'd spent the morning baking my famous apple pie, the one James had loved since he was small. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. The one Sarah, my daughter-in-law, always said was a bit too sweet, with that tight smile of hers. I'd brought a bouquet of hydrangeas from my garden too. Sarah's favorite flowers, though she never planted any herself. It was around 4 in the afternoon when it happened. I was helping my 12-year-old granddaughter Emma with her science project on the patio table, while the others gathered around the grill. Sarah was holding court as usual, her voice carrying across the yard. "Can you believe Margaret next door? 70 years old and signing up for a painting class in Italy. Who does she think she's fooling?" Sarah laughed, swirling her wine glass. Her kids must be mortified. I kept my eyes on Emma's project, pretending not to hear, though something tightened in my chest. Margaret had been widowed last year, just like me. We occasionally shared coffee and gardening tips. Her excitement about the painting trip had been the brightest I'd seen her since losing her husband. "Not everyone wants to be defined by their children and grandchildren," I said quietly, not looking up from the table. The conversation paused. I could feel eyes turning toward me. "Oh, Mom," James said with that placating tone he'd developed over the years. "You know that's not how it works. Family has to come first at our age." Sarah tilted her head, her sleek blonde bob catching the sunlight. "Honestly, Eleanor, you could disappear and no one would miss you. You barely leave that house anyway." The laughter that followed seemed to echo across the yard. James, my son-in-law Tom, even my teenage grandchildren joined in with uncomfortable chuckles. Emma glanced up at me, then quickly back down at her project. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded and said, "You might be right about that." The conversation moved on to neighborhood gossip, but something had shifted inside me. It wasn't just Sarah's words, cruel as they were. It was the laughter. It was James's failure to defend me. It was the sudden crystalline realization that this comment wasn't a casual joke, but the culmination of years of subtle erasure. As I drove home that evening, memories flooded back unbidden. The time I'd missed my book club to babysit the kids on zero notice, because Sarah had a migraine that didn't prevent her from going shopping the next day. The Christmas when my gift suggestions for the grandchildren were ignored in favor of the exact items I'd been told they wouldn't appreciate. The family vacation I'd helped pay for, where I ended up in the smallest room, expected to cook meals while everyone else enjoyed the beach. And James. My James. The little boy I'd raised alone after his father died when he was only 7. The child I'd worked 2 jobs to put through college. When had he started looking through me instead of at me? When had he begun to echo Sarah's dismissive tone? That night in my quiet house filled with 40 years of memories, I made a decision. Not out of anger, not even out of hurt, though there was plenty of that. I made a decision out of clarity. The next morning, I called my old friend Ruth, NC, attorney who had helped me with Robert's will when he passed. Then I contacted the real estate agent who had sold the Henderson place down the street. By afternoon, I had appointments with both for the following day. I spent that evening looking through photo albums. James on his first bike, James at his high school graduation, James getting married, Sarah radiant in white beside him, the grandchildren as babies, then toddlers, then increasingly distant as they grew. I noticed something as I turned the pages. The more recent the photos, the fewer I appeared in. Somehow, year by year, I'd been cropped out of my own family. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because I was happy, I wasn't, but because for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was making a choice entirely for myself. The next day, I began packing, sorting through a lifetime of possessions. What do you take when you're leaving everything behind? Robert's watch, my mother's pearls, the quilt my grandmother made. Not the dining room set I'd preserved for family holidays where I increasingly felt like the help. Not the crystal glasses. Sarah had once accidentally dropped after I mentioned they'd been a wedding gift from Robert's mother. I worked methodically, room by room. In my closet, I found the red dress I'd bought for my 60th birthday, the one Sarah had said was a bit desperate for someone your age. I folded it carefully into my suitcase. When Ruth arrived, she listened without judgment as I outlined what I wanted. "Are you sure about this, Eleanor?" she asked, peering over her reading glasses. "This is your home. It hasn't felt like home." "For a long time," I replied. "It's just a house where I store the things everyone expects me to have when they need them." Ruth nodded slowly. She'd known me for 30 years. She'd seen the gradual diminishment. "I'll have everything ready within the week," she said, squeezing my hand. "But Eleanor, what about James? The grandchildren?" I looked around at the living room where James had taken his first steps, where I'd bandaged scraped knees and read bedtime stories. "James stopped seeing me years ago," I said quietly, "and the grandchildren are being taught to do the same." That evening, after Ruth and the real estate agent had left, I stood in my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of family meals, and felt a strange lightness. Tomorrow would bring more preparations, more decisions. But for tonight, I allowed myself to imagine a life where I wasn't constantly bracing for the next dismissal, the next demand, the next reminder that my value was measured only by what I could provide. I picked up my phone and looked at the family group chat. No one had messaged to thank me for coming to the barbecue. No one had checked if I'd gotten home safely. There was only a message from Sarah about the next family dinner. "Mom, can you make your roast? The one with the potatoes? And maybe come early to help set up?" I put the phone down without replying. For once, the silence felt like power, not erasure. 3 days after the barbecue, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet except for the familiar creaking of the old maple tree against my bedroom window. Robert had always meant to trim those branches, another item on a list he never got to finish. I dressed carefully in my favorite blue cardigan and comfortable slacks. Not my usual house dress. There would be no gardening or cleaning today. My suitcases waited by the door, packed with only what truly mattered. 43 years in this house, reduced to 2 suitcases and a carry-on. The morning light cast long shadows across the kitchen where I'd prepared countless family meals. I ran my fingers along the counter where James had done his homework, where my grandchildren had helped bake Christmas cookies, before Sarah decided my kitchen was too outdated for holiday gatherings. At 8 o'clock sharp, I called a taxi. While waiting, I placed 3 envelopes on the dining room table. One contained the house keys and instructions about the plants. Another held information for James about accessing important documents. The third was addressed to my grandchildren. I didn't write long explanations or accusations. No tearful goodbyes. They'd made it clear that my absence would go unnoticed. So I simply wrote, "I've decided to take Sarah's advice. Since no one would miss me, I'm leaving." The taxi arrived just as Mrs. Peterson from next door stepped out to collect her newspaper. She waved, then paused, noticing my luggage. "Going somewhere nice, Eleanor?" she called. "Yes," I replied with unexpected certainty. Somewhere I should have gone a long time ago. At the bank, Mr. Winters, who'd handled my account since Robert died, seemed concerned. "That's a substantial withdrawal, Mrs. Mitchell. Is everything all right?" "Everything's finally going to be," I told him, signing the necessary forms. My next stop was Ruth's office. She had the papers ready, power of attorney, new banking details, and instructions for the real estate agent. "The house should sell quickly," she said. "The market's hot right now." "James will be furious," I noted, signing where indicated. Ruth, who'd witnessed 15 years of my gradual erasure from family photos and decisions, squeezed my hand. "James has had plenty of chances to see what was happening. This isn't about punishing him, Eleanor. It's about saving yourself." By noon, I was at the train station. I purchased a one-way ticket to Clearwater, a coastal town 3 states away where Robert and I had honeymooned 46 years ago. The place where I'd been happiest. As the train pulled away, I watched my town disappear. The church where Robert and I married, the school where James had played Little League, the hospital where I'd held my grandchildren for the first time, all receding into the distance. I expected to feel grief, guilt even. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Possibility. My phone buzzed. Sarah asking if I could take Emma shopping for school shoes tomorrow. I turned the phone off and slipped it into my purse. For the first time in decades, no one knew where I was. No one was waiting for me to solve their problems or meet their needs. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. An elderly gentleman across the aisle smiled at me. "First time traveling alone?" "No," I replied, surprising myself with a small smile. "But it's the first time I've traveled as myself." The familiar landscape gave way to rolling hills, then unfamiliar towns. With each mile, I felt the weight of expectations lifting. Sarah's voice echoed in my mind. "You could disappear, and no one would miss you." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps they wouldn't miss me. But for the first time in years, I realized there was someone I'd been missing desperately. Myself. As the train rocked gently on the tracks, I dozed off. I dreamed of the ocean, of standing on the shore with arms outstretched, the wind carrying away decades of careful silence and accommodation. When I awoke, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The kind of sunset I'd stopped noticing in my rush to prepare dinners no one appreciated or clean houses no one helped maintain. I wondered how long it would take them to realize I was truly gone. Would James stop by when he needed something, finding only empty rooms? Would the grandchildren notice my absence when their parents needed a last-minute babysitter? Would Sarah make some cutting remark about my dramatics before slowly understanding this wasn't a temporary disappearance? As the train pulled into a small station for a brief stop, I stepped onto the platform to stretch my legs. The evening air smelled of honeysuckle and possibility. An older couple walked hand in hand past me, laughing softly together. I watched them with a pang of something between envy and hope. My phone remained off in my purse. Whatever crisis required my immediate attention, Emma's school shoes, James's forgotten dry cleaning, Sarah's need for my apple pie recipe that she claimed was too sweet, would have to wait. Perhaps forever. The conductor called for boarding, and I returned to my seat, watching the unfamiliar town slide away as we resumed our journey. Tomorrow I would arrive in Clearwater. Tomorrow I would begin again. Not as James's mother, not as the grandchildren's babysitter, not as Sarah's convenient scapegoat, just as Eleanor. A woman who, at 65, was finally finding the courage to become visible to herself. 3 months passed quickly in Clearwater. I rented a small cottage 2 blocks from the ocean, close enough to hear the waves on quiet nights. My days developed a gentle rhythm. Morning walks along the shore, afternoons reading books I'd always meant to get to, evenings watching sunsets from my porch. After decades of existing according to others' schedules and needs, the simplicity of answering only to myself felt almost decadent. The first week, I kept waiting for the guilt to hit. It never did. I made friends, something that surprised me. There was Marge from the bookstore who invited me to her weekly card game. Henry, a widower who walked his golden retriever past my cottage each morning and eventually worked up the courage to ask me for coffee. The art instructor who convinced me to join her watercolor class despite my protests that I hadn't held a paintbrush since high school. On my bedside table sat my phone, turned off since that train ride 3 months ago. Occasionally, I'd look at it and wonder, were they worried? Angry? Had they filed a missing person report, or simply adapted to my absence the way Sarah had predicted they would? I didn't check. Not yet. This time was for me. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. I was painting at the community center when Gloria, my closest new friend, touched my shoulder. "Eleanor, there's a woman outside asking for you. Says she's an attorney." My heart stuttered. Ruth had found me. We'd arranged this timing months ago, but now that the moment had arrived, I felt unexpectedly nervous. Ruth waited in the garden, looking out of place in her tailored suit among the casual beachside attire. When she saw me, she broke into a wide smile and embraced me. "You look wonderful," she said, stepping back to examine me. Younger, somehow. We settled at a small cafe overlooking the harbor. Ruth opened her briefcase and laid out several documents. "The house sold above asking price," she began, sliding a paper toward me. "After settling the mortgage and fees, this is what you're left with." I stared at the figure. It was more than I'd expected, enough to buy my own place here in Clearwater if I wanted. "And as instructed, I've set up the trust for your grandchildren's education, accessible when they turn 21, with the stipulations you requested. The stipulations that they would need to demonstrate respect and kindness, that the money couldn't be controlled by their parents, that they would need to meet with me personally before any funds were released. Have they been looking for me?" I finally asked. Ruth's expression softened. "Yes, but not immediately. It took nearly 3 weeks before James contacted me asking if I knew where you were. 3 weeks. Sarah's words echoed in my ears. You could disappear, and no one would miss you. And then, once they realized you'd sold the house, things escalated quickly. Sarah called daily, then hourly. James threatened legal action, claiming you weren't of sound mind. I laughed without humor. Because no woman in her right mind would walk away from being their unpaid servant. Precisely. I informed them that you were perfectly competent and had made your decisions with full legal counsel. I also mentioned the trust for the grandchildren, which, Ruth paused, a small smile playing at her lips. Well, it complicated things for them. How so? Sarah was apparently counting on your house and savings for their future plans, a kitchen renovation, private school for the children. She's been telling people for years that you promised to leave everything to them. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. No wonder Sarah had worked so hard to isolate me, to minimize my role in the family. I wasn't just convenient help. I was a future inheritance. And the letter? I asked. Ruth nodded, reaching into her briefcase. Delivered yesterday, as planned, your new contact information, the terms of the trust, everything we discussed. I took a deep breath. Then I should turn my phone on, only if you're ready, Ruth cautioned. Based on the messages I've received, they're not in a reasonable state. Back at my cottage, I sat on the porch swing, phone in hand. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and plumeria. A neighbor's wind chimes tinkled softly. With steady hands, I powered on the phone. It immediately began buzzing frantically, notifications flooding the screen faster than I could process them. 127 missed calls, 89 voicemails, 243 text messages. I started with the earliest text, sent the day after I left. Mom, where are you? Emma needs those shoes today. The next day, this isn't funny anymore. Call me. 3 days later, Mom, seriously, people are worried. A week after that, if this is about what Sarah said at the barbecue, you're being ridiculously sensitive. The messages grew increasingly frantic and angry as weeks passed. The final text, sent yesterday, simply read, "We need to talk, now." I took a deep breath and pressed play on the first voicemail. Sarah's voice tight with controlled fury. "Eleanor, James just got some letter from your attorney. What the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just sell your family home without consulting us. Call back immediately." The next was James, his voice unrecognizable with rage. "Mom, have you lost your mind? You set up a trust with conditions you had no right." Voicemail after voicemail, escalating in hostility and panic. I listened to them all, feeling strangely detached, as if they were speaking about someone else. The final message was different. Emma, my oldest grandchild, her voice small and confused. "Grandma, are you okay? Dad's really mad and Mom keeps crying about money. I miss your cookies. Are you coming back?" That one pierced my carefully constructed armor. Emma at least had noticed something beyond the financial implications of my absence. As the sun began to set over the ocean, my phone rang. James's number. After 3 months of silence, the moment of reckoning had arrived. I answered. "Hello, James." My voice was steadier than I expected. A moment of stunned silence followed. Perhaps he hadn't actually expected me to answer. "Mom?" His voice cracked slightly. "Where the hell have you been? Do you have any idea what you've put us through?" "I left a note," I replied calmly. I took Sarah's advice. "What are you talking about?" "At my birthday barbecue, Sarah said I could disappear, and no one would miss me." Everyone laughed. "Including you, James." Another silence. Longer this time. "That was just a joke, Mom. You know Sarah doesn't mean half the things she says. Actually, I think that was one of the few honest things she's ever said to me." I could hear him breathing, trying to control his temper. James had always been quick to anger as a child. I'd spent years teaching him patience, understanding. Somewhere along the way, he'd learned to use that anger to control me instead. "You sold the house," he finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Our family home, without even telling us. It was my house, James, my name on the deed, my mortgage payments for 40 years. We had plans for that house. Sarah had already talked to contractors about renovations after..." He stopped abruptly. "After what, James? After I died? Or after you put me in a nursing home?" His silence confirmed. What I'd suspected for years. They'd been waiting me out. The trust is ridiculous. He continued, changing tactics. The kids don't need college funds with strings attached. We've been saving for them. Have you? Because Sarah told Mrs. Peterson last Christmas that you were counting on my money for their education. You're twisting things, he snapped. Mom, you need to come home. This little adventure of yours has gone far enough. I am home, James. This isn't like you, he pressed. You've never been selfish before? The word hit me like a physical blow. Selfish. After a lifetime of putting everyone else first, of shrinking myself, to make room for their needs and wants, my one act of self-preservation was labeled selfish. I think you should come see me, I said quietly. Alone. Without Sarah. Sarah's my wife, Mom. We're a package deal. Not this time. If you want to understand why I left, you'll come alone. After some argument, he finally agreed. 3 days later, I waited at the small cafe by the harbor, watching tourists stroll along the boardwalk. I'd arrived early, choosing a table with a clear view of the entrance and the ocean beyond. When James walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. His face was gaunt, hair disheveled, eyes darting nervously around the cafe until they landed on me. For a brief moment, relief washed over his features before hardening into something closer to resentment. You look different, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. I am different. He studied me, taking in my new shorter haircut, the colorful scarf around my neck, the absence of the perpetually worried expression I'd worn for years. How did you find this place? Your father and I honeymooned here, before you were born. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. There was so much of my life before motherhood that James had never bothered to learn about. Mom, you need to come back. The kids miss you. Do they? Or does Sarah miss her free babysitter? His jaw tightened. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk, James? Not to ask for something? Not to tell me what time to arrive to watch the kids or help with dinner? Just to check how I was doing? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I can't remember either, I said softly. The waitress brought coffee. James fidgeted with his spoon, avoiding my gaze. Sarah's been intercepting my birthday cards to the children. I continued. Did you know that? The gifts I sent that mysteriously got lost in the mail? She's been telling them I forgot. That's ridiculous, he scoffed, but uncertainty flickered across his face. Check my phone, I said, sliding it across the table. There are photos of every gift, every card I've sent for the past 5 years. Ask Emma if she ever received the watercolor set for her birthday in March. Ask Liam about the science kit at Christmas. James scrolled through the photos, his expression shifting from disbelief to confusion. This doesn't make sense. Sarah wouldn't. She's been isolating me for years, James, making sure I had less and less influence over you and the children. Didn't you ever wonder why I supposedly forgot so many important dates? Why I allegedly made those hurtful comments about your parenting that you confronted me about? Comments I never actually made? His hand trembled slightly as he set down my phone. Why would she do that? Because I was competition for control. And because she's been planning her financial future around my death or incapacitation. The house, my savings, she had it all allocated in her mind. James stared out at the ocean, processing. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. I should have seen it. Yes, you should have. But you should have said something. Anger flashed in his eyes, the familiar deflection of responsibility. I tried, James, for years. You always took her side. Always assumed I was being difficult or oversensitive. After a while, I stopped trying. Silence fell between us, filled only by the distant crash of waves and the murmur of nearby conversations. What do you want? He finally asked. I want to be seen, James. Not as a convenience, not as a checkbook, not as a problem to be managed. As a person with my own life and value. He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. Neither do I replied honestly, but recognizing there's something broken is a start. As James drove me back to my cottage, the car filled with an uncomfortable silence. He pulled into the driveway, eyeing the cheerful yellow house with its flower boxes and porch swing. It suits you, he said quietly. Yes, I agreed. It does. Will you ever come back? I turned to face my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the man who'd allowed me to become invisible. I'm not coming back to how things were, James. That version of me is gone. but I'm willing to build something new, if you are. He nodded slowly, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. I'll talk to Sarah. You do that, I said, stepping out of the car. And James? Next time bring Emma and Liam. Just them. As his car disappeared down the road, I stood in my garden, breathing in the salt air and feeling for the first time in our conversation a cautious hope. I wasn't surprised when Sarah showed up unannounced at my cottage 3 days later. I'd been expecting her. I was in the garden, pruning my newly planted roses, when a silver SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. Sarah emerged, immaculately dressed as always, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes. She paused at the gate, taking in my modest home with poorly disguised disdain. Eleanor, her voice carried that familiar false sweetness. What a charming little place you've found. I set down my gardening shears and removed my gloves. Hello, Sarah. James told me he'd talk to you. Oh, he did. She stepped into the garden, uninvited. He's been quite confused lately, saying all sorts of things about gifts and cards. I gestured toward the porch. Would you like some iced tea? Her smile tightened. I'm not here for a social call. I know exactly why you're here, Sarah. Inside, I poured 2 glasses of tea anyway. Sarah followed, her eyes scanning every corner of my cottage, no doubt calculating its value, assessing how much of her anticipated inheritance I'd spent on my new life. The children miss you, she said, not touching her tea. You've been incredibly selfish, disappearing like this. That's interesting, coming from you. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know what you've been doing, Sarah. The lies. The manipulation. Hiding my gifts to the grandchildren. Telling them I'd forgotten. Birthdays and holidays. A flicker of unease crossed her face before she recovered. James shouldn't believe everything you say just because you're his mother. You've clearly been planning this. Betrayal for some time. Is that what this is? A betrayal? Not a woman, finally standing up for herself after years of being used and dismissed? Sarah's composure slipped. Used? We gave you purpose. Before us, what did you have? An empty house and garden club meetings with other lonely old women. The cruelty of her words hung in the air between us. This was the real Sarah, the one I'd glimpsed in unguarded moments over the years. You needed me, I said quietly. Free, childcare, holiday cooking, someone to blame when things went wrong. But you never valued me. Oh, please, she rolled her eyes. The martyr act is getting old, Eleanor. You know what your problem is? You never adapted. Women our age need to know their place. And where exactly is that place, Sarah? In the background, supporting the family, not demanding attention or appreciation every 5 minutes. I took a slow sip of my tea, studying the woman my son had married. So young, so beautiful, and so desperately insecure. Why did you tell the children I forgot their birthdays? I asked. Sarah's mouth tightened. They needed to learn not to depend on you too much. You're not getting any younger. And the trust I set up for their education, is that why you're really here? Her eyes narrowed. Those conditions are ridiculous. The children shouldn't have to jump through hoops for what should rightfully be theirs. Rightfully theirs? Or rightfully yours? A flush crept up her neck. James and I have plans for the children. Good schools, the right opportunities. Your interference could ruin everything. My money, you mean? Family resources should stay in the family. I couldn't agree more. I replied calmly. That's why the trust is structured the way it is, to ensure the children receive their inheritance directly, not filtered through you. Sarah stood abruptly, her tea untouched. We're prepared to challenge this legally. Your mental competence could easily be questioned after this irrational behavior. I smiled, unruffled. Ruth has thoroughly documented my mental state, Sarah. Multiple evaluations, witnesses. You'd be wasting your time and money. James will never forgive you for this, she hissed. Perhaps, but I'm finally learning to forgive myself for allowing this situation for so long. She snatched her purse, knuckles white with rage. This isn't over. Actually, it is. Please tell James I'm still expecting the children this weekend. Just them. Sarah stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Through the curtains, I watched her sit in her car for several minutes, furiously typing on her phone, before finally driving away. I exhaled slowly, surprised by my own calm. There had been a time when Sarah's anger would have left me shaking, desperate to smooth things over. Now I felt only relief at having finally confronted the truth. My phone rang an hour later. "James, she went to see you." Not a question. Yes, a heavy sigh. "Mom, I found the cards. In a box in Sarah's closet. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, years' worth, and receipts for returning gifts." My heart ached, not for myself, but for him, for the painful realization he was facing. "I'm sorry, James. Don't apologize," he said sharply. "I should have seen it. I should have questioned why you suddenly became so forgetful about the kids, but nothing else." Silence stretched between us. "The kids still want to come this weekend," he finally said. "Is that still okay?" "Of course. I'll drive them down Friday." "Sarah." He hesitated. "Sarah won't be joining us." After we hung up, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. For the first time since leaving, I allowed myself to fully feel the grief, not for what I'd lost, but for what had never truly existed. The loving family I'd tried so hard to build on a foundation of manipulation and conditional acceptance. Friday arrived with perfect weather. I spent the morning preparing, baking Emma's favorite cookies, setting up the telescope Liam had expressed interest in, readying the guest room with fresh linens. When their car pulled up, my heart raced with nervous anticipation. Would they be angry? Resentful? Had Sarah poisoned them against me despite James's intervention? Emma stepped out first, 13 now, and looking so grown up it made my chest ache. She hesitated, uncertain, until our eyes met. Then she ran toward me, flinging her arms around my waist with a sob. "Grandma! We thought you didn't want us anymore." Liam followed more cautiously, 10 years old and trying to appear brave. But when I opened my arm to include him, he pressed his face against my shoulder. "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" he whispered. Over their heads, I met James's gaze. He stood by the car, watching us with a complicated expression of guilt, relief, and something like respect. "Come inside," I said to the children. "I have so much to tell you, and even more to hear about what you've been doing while I've been gone." As they eagerly followed me into the cottage, chattering about school and friends, I felt a strange new emotion blossoming, not the desperate need for approval that had driven me for so long, but something steadier, something like peace. The future remained uncertain. Sarah would not give up easily. James had years of patterns to unlearn, but for now, with my grandchildren's hands in mine, this moment was enough. It was a beginning. 1 year after I walked away from my old life, I celebrated my 66th birthday in my Clearwater cottage. No elaborate barbecue, no tension-filled family gathering, just a simple dinner with people who truly saw me. Emma and Liam had arrived the day before, bursting with excitement about spending 2 weeks of their summer vacation with me. James would join us later, driving down after finishing a work project. So much had changed in a year. My cottage wasn't just a rental anymore. I'd purchased it with part of the proceeds from selling the family home. The garden had flourished under my care, bursting with colorful blooms and fragrant herbs. Inside, every room reflected my preferences, not obligations to family traditions or others' expectations. More importantly, I'd changed. The woman who had nodded silently when her daughter-in-law suggested no one would miss her was gone. In her place stood someone who painted watercolors, joined a theater group, and had even started dating Henry, my neighbor with the golden retriever. "Grandma, can we have your special pancakes tomorrow?" Liam asked, helping me set the table for dinner. "Of course," I smiled. "And maybe we can take the boat out if the weather's good." Emma looked up from arranging flowers. "Dad says he's bringing the documents. What does that mean?" I kept my expression neutral. "Just some papers we need to discuss. Nothing for you to worry about." The truth was more complicated. After months of conflict, James had finally filed for divorce from Sarah. The documents were the settlement papers that apparently had Sarah furious about what she considered inadequate terms. Our peaceful dinner was interrupted by the doorbell. Thinking it might be James arriving early, I opened the door to find Sarah standing there, her expression brittle. "Sarah," I said, genuinely surprised. "We weren't expecting you." Clearly. Her gaze swept past me to the children. "Emma, Liam, get your things. We're leaving." The children froze, looking between us in confusion. "Mom?" Emma's voice quavered. "We just got here. We're staying 2 weeks. Plans change," Sarah snapped. "Now!" I stepped forward, blocking the doorway. They're not going anywhere, Sarah. This visit was approved by James and the court. Her eyes narrowed, always interfering. This is exactly why we're in this mess. Mom, please, Liam pleaded. We want to stay with Grandma. Sarah's face contorted. After everything I've done for you both? This is how you repay me? By choosing her? I turned to the children. Emma, take Liam to the back porch for a few minutes while I talk to your mother. Once they were out of earshot, I faced Sarah directly. You need to leave. Not without my children. They're not possessions, Sarah. And right now, they're scheduled to be with their father and grandmother. She laughed bitterly. Their father. Do you know what James has done? He's trying to take everything from me. The house, custody, everything. I'm sorry the marriage didn't work out, I said, meaning it despite everything. But that's between you and James. No, it's not. This all started when you left, when you turned him against me. I shook my head. I didn't turn anyone against you, Sarah. I simply stopped allowing myself to be invisible. Her composure cracked. You think you've won, don't you? Creating this perfect little life while destroying mine. This isn't about winning. It's about finally living authentically. Spare me the self-help nonsense, she hissed. You took everything from me. No, Sarah, I took myself back. We stood in silence, the weight of years of mutual resentment between us. For the first time, I saw something beyond anger in her eyes. Fear. Fear of losing control, of facing consequences, of having to redefine herself. I did love him, she said quietly. In the beginning. I believe you. She blinked rapidly. The children still need their mother. No one is taking them from you, Sarah, but they need a mother who sees them as individuals, not extensions of herself. A car pulled into the driveway. James. He took in the scene, his expression hardening when he spotted Sarah. What are you doing here? He demanded, joining us at the door. Apparently being ambushed, Sarah replied, straightening her shoulders. James sighed. We agreed the kids would stay with Mom for 2 weeks. That's the schedule we worked out with the mediator. I changed my mind. You can't just... I touched James's arm. Why don't you check on the children? I think Sarah and I need another minute. After a hesitant look between us, he nodded and went inside. I turned back to Sarah. The children love you. That won't change. But this moment, showing up unannounced, trying to disrupt their vacation, this isn't about them. It's about you trying to reassert control. She didn't deny it. I understand feeling like you're losing everything, I continued. I felt that way for years, watching my role in the family diminish until I was barely visible. Sarah's gaze dropped. It wasn't personal. You were just in the way. In the way of what, Sarah? A mother who loved her son. A grandmother who adored her grandchildren. She had no answer. Go home, I said gently. Give the children these 2 weeks. When they return, be the mother they deserve. One who puts their happiness above her need for control. For a moment, I thought she might argue further. Instead, she straightened her designer jacket and nodded stiffly. This isn't over, she said, but the threat sounded hollow. No, it's not, I agreed. We'll be in each other's lives for years because of the children, but it could be different. Better. After she left, I found James and the children on the back porch, anxiously waiting. Is Mom really making us leave? Liam asked. I sat beside him. No, sweetheart. You're staying right here as planned. Relief washed over their faces. James caught my eye, a question in his expression. Later, after the children were asleep, we sat on the porch with glasses of wine. What did you say to her? He asked. I've never seen Sarah back down like that. I considered my answer carefully. I think she saw herself in me, James. The difference is, I waited until I was 65 to reclaim my life. She still has time to find a better way forward. He nodded slowly. The divorce papers are ready. I brought them for you to see. I don't need to see them. That's between you and Sarah. But after everything she did to you, this isn't about revenge, James. It's about everyone finding their proper place, including Sarah. The gentle night breeze carried the scent of jasmine from my garden. In the distance, the rhythmic sound of waves against the shore provided a soothing backdrop. You know, James said quietly. When Sarah said no one would miss you, she was wrong. We did miss you. I missed you. I just didn't realize how much I'd taken you for granted until you were gone. I squeezed his hand. Sometimes people need to disappear before others can truly see them. 1 year ago, I'd been a woman so accustomed to invisibility that I simply nodded when told I wouldn't be missed. Now I moved through the world fully seen, by my grandchildren, by my son, by my friends, and most importantly, by myself. The following morning, I woke early and walked along the shore as the sun rose over the water. In the distance, I could see Henry walking his golden retriever. He waved, and I waved back, and I waved back, a simple gesture that carried the promise of a future I'd never imagined for myself. Back at the cottage, Emma was already up, sitting on the porch with her sketchbook. "Grandma," she said as I approached, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, sweetheart?" She turned her sketchbook toward me. It was a drawing of a small building with a sign that read, "Eleanor's Art Studio." "You're so good at watercolors now," she explained. "Maybe you could teach classes. I could help during summer breaks." I sat beside her, touched by the thought she'd put into this. "You know, that's not a bad idea. You always helped everyone else," she said with a wisdom beyond her years. "Maybe now you can do something just because it makes you happy." Inside, I could hear Liam and James in the kitchen, laughing as they attempted to make breakfast. The scent of slightly burnt toast wafted through the open window. It wasn't the inheritance Sarah had hoped for, but it was the one I'd finally claimed. The freedom to exist as myself, unapologetically present in my own life. And perhaps the most precious inheritance of all was what I now had the opportunity to pass down to Emma and Liam. Not money or property, but the understanding that it's never too late to become visible, to claim your worth, to start again.